Boxing versus mixed martial arts. The arguments are endless. Most people consider boxing like like a pretty American thing, you know, like most people put their kids in boxing just for the self-defense and all that. And there are people out there that say mixed martial arts is barbaric. It's actually illegal in some states. Like I said, the arguments are endless. Whether it's which of the two is a better athlete, the boxer or the mixed martial arts. Whether one or the other can be considered an athlete at all, who trains harder, who hits harder, who's more lethal. Everybody has their side of belief. But in constructing these arguments, does anybody ever consider how safe the fighters are, like when they're competing? I'm here to say that the long-term effects suffered by boxers are worse than those suffered by MMA fighters. Some might ask what would lead to like such a conclusion, considering that boxers have really padded gloves compared to like the traditional MMA gloves, which you got your open fingers, basically your fist. Things that lead me to believe that MMA is safer than boxing are: boxing requires that all strikes be directed above the waist, and I'll explain why that's kind of a problem. MMA doesn't have a count rule. Once the fighter's down and out, they're out. And lastly, the types of long-term injuries that have been reported, like between the two sports, are drastically different. But that could change considering that MMA is fairly new. It's pretty new, or it's fairly gone mainstream, like it hasn't been too long. In a boxing match, two fighters are put against each other for 10 to 12 3-minute rounds, in which they use only their hands to punch from the waist up. The point of the sport, like any other, is to defeat your opponent. Well, that kind of sounds bad, but to beat your opponent. And in boxing, that can come in a knockout, a stoppage, or pretty much a decision. I don't think many fighters want to leave it to a decision because that usually doesn't go too good. So their main intention is usually a knockout. And victories in MMA can come in the same ways as boxing, except there's something else, which are submissions. And according to a 2006 study by neurological surgeons, the average hit that a boxer receives in the ring can be compared to a 12-pound mallet being swung at about 20 miles per hour. So you can imagine that nothing but those kind of hits, like being swung directly at the head, is pretty dangerous. Of course, the padding is there, but the padding pretty much all it does is makes it so that the fighters can absorb the hits and they can take more hits. And yeah, in boxing, once the fighter's down, they have a chance to get right back up if they can beat the count. And in doing so, they just continue to get hit more. And like I said, mixed martial arts, they don't have a count, so once the fighter's out, there's no second chance to get back up for the night. When a fighter's allowed a chance to get back up, it's really not too good because they're up against a professional who's fully there and it's a dazed fighter. The British Board of Sports Medicine says that the main reason for most serious injuries is due in part to the count rule. In combat sports, there will always be injuries. In boxing, head injuries are the biggest concern. Things such as dementia, concussions, and eye injuries are not uncommon. The American Association of Neurological Surgeons says that 90% of boxers will have sustained a brain injury by the end of their careers. Just as an example, Muhammad Ali can be used to show what can happen to a fighter who has sustained many blows to the head over years of competing. In MMA, injuries include head trauma, musculoskeletal stress, joint dislocation, and soft tissue trauma, as well as cuts and lacerations. A Johns Hopkins University study concluded that head trauma and cerebral hemorrhages are the #1 cause of death in combat sports. With that being said, it only makes sense to agree that boxing is the more dangerous sport of the two. To summarize the main things that make boxing more dangerous than mixed martial arts, they are requiring hits to be above the waist, means that most of the hits will be directed at the head because that's where a knockout can easily be achieved. Boxers have a chance to get up after being put down, which allows for more injury, and boxing leads to head and brain injuries. Obviously, brain and head injuries can divert a person from living a normal life, a normal or enjoyable life later on. If I could make any suggestion to protect these fighters, it would be to get rid of the count rule. Once the fighter is clearly dazed and down, the fight should be over to avoid further injury.
Yeah.
Erica, what did you think?
That was okay, but you looked too much in your paper, and at the beginning I didn't know like if you were going with boxing or martial arts. Like, it wasn't clear if one was like more dangerous than the other. It was really informative, and
All right, I thought that the strongest part of the speech is in the opening. You identified the subject. You've got a very clear statement of what your purpose is. There's a good preview about how you're going to develop this argument. So all the structural stuff is very solid there. In the body of the speech, you also signpost pretty well as you're going through that structure. At the end, you also had a good review so that we can be reminded one more time how this argument is coming together. I think in the second part of the speech, you were very consistent about citing sources on the risks to boxers in particular. You mentioned brain injury, and you had some statistics on that. What I didn't get was much comparison, since you are making a comparison that the one is more dangerous than the other. We don't know what percentage of MMA fights end in the so-called knockout as opposed to submission. I'm still trying to figure out why head injuries would not be likely in MMA, although there are obviously other ways in which they win the fights. You kind of suggest that the only way in boxing is by inflicting head trauma, and that in MMA there are others, which I'm not disputing. The question is that in fact how it gets done? Or do they just kick some guy in the head and then it's out because instead of a fist it was the heel of some guy's foot in another guy's face? I don't know. It's one of those things. I don't know if there are no statistics on that subject. There may, it may be one of those things that there's still limited data on, which I think you also pointed out.
There was, but
yeah.
I just forgot something to do.
Okay, well.
It's like 25% don't
Right.
knock out.
Yeah, I think that comparison would probably be helpful to the argument that you're making. Toward the end of the speech, you also kind of make this suggestion about maybe a way to modify boxing, and you're kind of strolling off into a policy argument there that you don't really pursue much, and it might have been a good argument to develop, but it's not really the focus of your speech. So either I think you need to develop it a little bit or just leave it out. Delivery, there's a lot of reading. You need more energy at this point. You know exactly what's going to go on. I mean, you're going to watch it and you're going to say, I know what he's going to say and what he's going to think about all those things, because I've been saying them all semester long. I do think that I haven't picked these things out to talk about before. I do think you might want to think about the nature of your sweatshirt. It's a little bit distracting during the presentation, and you're trying to talk about a serious subject, and we've got something that's a little whimsical and off topic as the background on your speech. All right, thank you.